The room went quiet when I set the blue folder on the table. Not the polite kind of quiet, this was the kind where coffee cups stop mid-air and everyone realizes something expensive is about to break. Kyle was still smiling halfway through a sentence about growth when the numbers hit the screen behind him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth had weight all by itself. An hour earlier, I hadn't planned on saying a word to anyone. It started in the lumber aisle at Menards of all places. Saturday afternoon. The heaters hummed. Carts squeaked. A kid argued with his dad over the difference between deck screws and drywall screws. I was comparing prices on treated 2x4s when my phone buzzed. One buzz, then another. I glanced down expecting a coupon or a text from my fishing buddy Ray. Instead, a photo loaded slowly, bar by bar, like it was taking its time just to be cruel. Bright green fairway. Blue sky. A grin I recognized too well. Kyle. My stepson had his arm around a man I'd seen before, always in the background of Diane's stories. Always a consultant, always conveniently around on weekends. She was busy with the girls. They were both laughing, sunglasses on, leaning against an SUV that caught the sun just right. My SUV. The one I'd bought outright 6 months earlier because Kyle said he needed something reliable to impress clients. The one I insured. The one I paid the taxes on. The one I'd let him drive because he called me Pops and said thank you. Another notification slid across the screen. My bank app, a pending charge. Green Valley Country Club. Green's Fee Cart lunch, all of it on my card. I stood there in Menards with a box of screws in my hand and felt something cold settle under my ribs. Not rage, not yet. Something heavier, like embarrassment mixed with grief. At 57, you don't expect to be surprised by people anymore. You think you've seen all the ways folks can disappoint you. Turns out I'd just gotten lazy about checking statements. I paid for the screws and walked out into the parking lot. The air had that early fall bite, Wisconsin, reminding you winter's always waiting its turn. I sat in my truck for a minute, with the engine off, phone resting on the steering wheel, photo still glowing like a bad joke. I didn't call Diane. I didn't call Kyle. I didn't even swear. I just stared. A memory surfaced without asking. The night Kyle came over with a manila envelope and a pitch deck spreading papers across our kitchen table like he was building a house out of numbers. Diane beamed. Kyle talked fast. I listened. I asked boring questions about margins and guarantees. He laughed and said, "Pops, you worry too much." I'd signed anyway, because back then I wanted to believe in something that felt like family. I drove home past the Fox River, past the bait shop, with the crooked sign past the diner that still smelled like bacon grease at noon. Our house looked the same as it always did. White siding, neat lawn, the illusion of order. Inside, the kitchen clock ticked louder than usual. I set my keys down and pulled out my phone again. More charges, fuel, pro shop, a spa deposit from Diane's book club weekend. It was all there, neat as columns on a spreadsheet. I poured myself coffee even though it was already late. Folgers, lukewarm. I took one sip and set the mug down untouched. At my age, the fear isn't losing money. It's losing your footing. Starting over. Sitting alone in a quiet house while the lake wind rattles the windows and everyone else has somewhere to be. I stood there thinking about winters and microwave dinners and the sound of my own breathing. That's when I made the decision, not out of anger, but out of clarity. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to confront anyone in a driveway or throw a phone across the room. Everything Kyle enjoyed ran through paperwork I understood better than he ever had. Contracts, guarantees, authorizations, quiet things, old-fashioned things. I grabbed a jacket and drove to Culver's, ordered a Butterburger I couldn't taste, and watched families file in with kids sticky from ice cream. I thought about how many times I'd paid for things just to keep the peace. How peace, it turned out, was the most expensive thing I'd ever bought. When I got home, I went to the garage. The heater clicked on. Tools lined the wall like they always had. I pulled a binder from the shelf, Mercer route, and set it on the workbench. The cover was worn from being opened and closed by someone who believed in details. I opened it. I didn't smile. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. That was enough to begin. The garage smelled like old oil and sawdust the way it always had. The space heater clicked on and off, throwing a dry warmth across the concrete. I shut the door, pulled the chain on the overhead light, and stood there for a second, listening to the hum. No music, no radio. just me and the quiet. I laid the binder on the workbench and opened it to the first tab. Ownership and voting rights. Kyle had skimmed this section when we signed, more interested in the coffee Diane brought in than the paragraphs I'd highlighted. He called it boilerplate. I called it gravity. 73%. That was my number. Not flashy, not advertised, but real. I'd structured it that way because I'd spent 30 years in logistics watching companies rise on enthusiasm and fall on details. I didn't want control. I wanted protection. I flipped pages, capital tranches, disbursement schedules. A clause most people ignored because it sounded boring: material misuse and reputational harm, the kind of language lawyers used when they didn't want surprises later. I ran my finger under the sentence and felt my pulse steady. My phone buzzed again. Diane. I let it ring, then I answered. Hey, she said soft. Careful, you okay? You've been distant today. I'm fine, I said. It wasn't a lie, not yet. She filled the silence with concern the way she always did when she wanted information. Kyle mentioned you might be tired. You work too much, you know that. I looked at the page labeled Personal Guarantee. My name was there, neat and legible, promising a bank I'd stand behind a fleet lease if things went sideways. I remembered Kyle's grin when the approval came through. Couldn't have done it without you, Pops. Yeah, I said, I know. After we hung up, I poured the coffee down the sink and wiped the mug clean. I didn't want anything lingering. I turned the page and found an email thread I'd forgotten about, forwarded months earlier by mistake. Kyle had been joking with his team about vision and scaling words that sounded big until you asked what they meant. Then the line that tightened my jaw. Stepdad's money, my vision. He won't notice the details. I sat on the stool and read it twice. The heater clicked. The clock in the kitchen ticked through the wall. I didn't feel insulted. I felt reduced, like a wallet with a pulse. I called Walt Jensen. Walt answered on the second ring like he always did. What's up, Tom, he said. I could hear papers shuffling a printer in the background. I need you to sanity check something I said. No drama, just numbers. Walt listened. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he exhaled through his nose. You're not wrong, he said, and you're not cruel. You're late. He walked me through the sequence slow and steady. Withdrawal windows, notice periods, what to do first and what to leave alone so it didn't look like a tantrum. Swing legal, he said, quiet. You don't want collateral damage. Collateral damage, the phrase stuck with me. Kyle had employees, kids with mortgages, people who didn't play golf on my dime. I wasn't out to hurt them. My phone lit up again, a text from Kyle. Dad, quick question, did you change anything with the card? The pro shop says it declined. I stared at it longer than I should have, then typed, could be the bank. I'll look into it Monday. He sent a thumbs up emoji, like that settled it. I closed the binder and opened another folder. Insurance, vehicle authorization. The SUV was still in my name. Kyle was listed as an authorized driver, not an owner. That wasn't a fight. That was a phone call. I made it. Polite, professional, updated coverage. Removed authorization, no lectures, no explanations. By the time I hung up, my hands were shaking, not from excitement, but from the realization that this would cost me too. Fees, delays, maybe taxes. Freedom was going to take a bite. I sat there thinking about winters again, about whether being right would keep me warm. Diane called once more. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was sweet at first, then tight. We need to talk, she said. This isn't fair. Fair, the word echoed in the garage. I packed the binder back onto the shelf and shut the light off. As I walked inside, my phone buzzed with another notification, this time from the bank app. A reversal posted, another pending charge dropped. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was the first domino tipping over. I woke up before dawn, the house still dark, the kind of quiet that makes every sound feel louder than it should. The coffee maker gurgled like it was clearing its throat. I stood at the counter in my socks and checked my phone. 3 missed calls, 2 from Diane, 1 from Kyle. I didn't listen to the voicemails yet. I knew what they'd say. Panic wrapped in accusation. I needed my head clear. At 6:30, my bank app refreshed. The withdrawal posted clean lawful exactly as outlined. 73%. Not everything. Enough. I watched the numbers settle, and felt a strange mix of relief and nausea, like stepping off a boat onto solid ground after rough water. Diane came down the stairs in a robe, hair pulled back, eyes already sharp. "My card was declined at the spa," she said. "No greeting, no good morning." "I know," I said, pouring coffee. She stared at me like I'd slapped her. "What do you mean, you know?" "It means we need to talk later," I said. "I've got some things to handle." Things, her voice climbed. "You can't just, Tom, this is embarrassing." Embarrassing, that word again. I took a sip and burned my tongue. "So was finding out I paid for your golf weekend." She froze, just for a second. "Enough." "Kyle called at 8, I answered this time. "What the hell did you do?" he said, skipping. "Hello?" "I followed the contract," I said. "You should read it sometime." "You pulled the money," he said. I could hear voices behind him in his office. "Payroll's a mess. Vendors are calling." "I gave notice," I said. "Exactly as written." "You're ruining me," he snapped. I thought about the email. He won't notice the details. "No," I said. "I'm stopping." He hung up. By mid-morning, the ripple effects were visible without me touching a thing. A notification from the leasing company about the fleet renewal. A polite email asking if my guarantee would be extended. I replied with one sentence, "It will not." At 11, my phone buzzed with a text from Kyle. "Dad, this is serious. The club says my membership is flagged." I imagined him standing at the counter trying to keep his voice steady while people pretended not to listen. I typed back, "That's between you and the club." There was a time years ago when I taught Kyle how to back a trailer into a narrow dock behind the old warehouse. He jackknifed twice and laughed it off. "I'll get it," he said. He always thought he would. Around noon, I got the call from the dealership. "Mr. Halverson, the vehicle authorization update is complete," the woman said. "If the driver attempts to operate, the car coverage won't apply." "Thank you," I said. My voice sounded older than it felt. The text came 10 minutes later. "Are you serious? The SUV is saying I'm not authorized." I didn't reply. Diane paced the kitchen phone, pressed to her ear, whispering and hissing in turns. She hung up and glared at me. "Gavin says you're being vindictive." I looked at her. Really looked. At the woman who'd once held my arm at church picnics and called me steady. "Gavin doesn't pay our bills," I said. She laughed sharp and short. "He would if you weren't doing this." That was the moment it clicked. Gavin wasn't the reason. He was the accessory, the spending, the image, the life that looked good from the outside, and none of it had her name on it. My phone buzzed again. A different tone this time, my banking alert. I watched balances adjust, accounts settle. I felt my chest tighten, not with triumph, but with worry. Kyle's employees didn't deserve chaos. I called Walt. "Is there a way to keep payroll clean?" I asked. "There is," he said. "Temporary bridge. You'll take a hit." "I can live with that," I said. By late afternoon, Kyle's text turned frantic. "Please, we can talk. You're blowing this up." I sat at the kitchen table and finally listened to Diane's voicemails. The first was tearful. The second was angry. The third was quiet. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said. "You're punishing me." I closed my eyes. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was ending something that shouldn't have been mine to carry. At 5, a message popped up from Kyle. "Dad card declined at the pro shop in front of a client. This is humiliating." I typed one line. "Humiliation passes, debt lasts." There was no reply. That evening, I drove to the river and sat in the truck watching the water move slow and steady, carrying leaves downstream. I thought about the first time Kyle called me Pops and meant it. I thought about Diane's laugh before it started sounding rehearsed. I thought about the employees texting their boss scared. This wasn't easy. It wasn't clean. It was necessary. When I got home, Diane had packed an overnight bag. She paused at the door. "You could stop this," she said. I nodded. "So could you," I said. The door closed behind her. The house felt larger, emptier. I stood there for a long time listening to the clock tick and the refrigerator hum. My phone buzzed one last time that night. An email invitation from Kyle sent to a long list investor update night growth story. A personal note at the bottom, "Come see what you helped build." I smiled for the first time all day. The calls didn't stop. They changed shape. Kyle's voicemails turned from angry to rehearse, like he was practicing lines in front of a mirror. "We can restructure," he said in one. "Short-term liquidity issue," he said in another, as if words could prop up a ledger. Diane's calls followed the same pattern. First tears, then blame, then something softer that made my stomach knot. Tom, she said one evening, voice low and careful, you know I wouldn't have done this if I'd felt seen. Seen. The word landed wrong. I thought about the early mornings I'd made coffee for both of us, the weekends I skipped fishing to attend her work events, the checks I signed without asking for applause. I didn't say any of that. I hear you, I said, but this isn't about feelings anymore. She exhaled, frustrated. So what, you're just going to watch everything burn? I'm watching it settle, I said. There's a difference. At the Rotary Club luncheon that Thursday, I felt the difference. The hotel banquet room smelled like overcooked chicken and cheap gravy, name tags stuck crooked to jackets. I took my usual seat near the back. Kyle stood near the front, laughing too loud, trying to look relaxed. People noticed me before they noticed him. Eyes flicked. Conversations shifted. A vendor I recognized, Tommy from the fleet maintenance company, gave Kyle a polite nod and then moved to another table. Kyle's smile faltered. Small towns are like that. News doesn't travel fast. It just never stops moving. My phone buzzed under the table. A voicemail notification. Kyle again. I didn't listen. I knew the script. Diane tried a different angle that night. She showed up at the house without warning, eyes red, holding the overnight bag like a shield. I made a mistake, she said. I know that, but you're being cruel. I leaned against the counter and kept my voice even. Cruel would be pretending nothing happened and letting it happen again. She wiped her cheeks. So what, you're going to lawyer up and erase me? I'm going to protect myself, I said. You're welcome to do the same. She looked at me like she wanted to say something cutting, then thought better of it. Kyle's scared, she said. You don't have to like him, but he's family. That word again. Family. I thought about the email. He won't notice the details. He should have treated me like it, I said. She left without another word. Sleep came in pieces. I'd wake up thinking I'd heard the door, then remember it was just the furnace kicking on. Around 3 a.m, I listened to Kyle's voicemails for the first time. The last one was different, quieter. You're ruining me, overriding me, he said, tripping over his words. Gavin says you're doing this out of spite. Gavin. The name was a thread I'd been pulling without realizing it. I checked Diane's call log from the shared plan, fewer entries, shorter calls. Whatever comfort he'd been offering was thinning out. The next afternoon, I met Ray by the river. He baited his hook and didn't look at me when he spoke. You sleep? Not much. He nodded. That's the price of standing up late in life. Costs more. I smiled at that. You think I'm wrong? Ray shrugged. You're calm. That's how I know you're right. Friday morning, the email arrived. Reminder, investor update night. Monday, 6:30 p.m. Same hotel, same room. Kyle added a line this time just to me. Let's keep this professional. I replied with one word, agreed. By the weekend, the pressure peaked. Kyle showed up once, pounding on the door. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail full of threats that sounded thin even as he made them. Diane sent a message saying she was staying with a friend for space. Gavin stopped calling entirely. Sunday night, I laid out a clean shirt and a folder on the kitchen table. Blue, heavy, the kind of weight you can feel without lifting. I didn't feel excited. I felt ready. The hotel ballroom smelled like burnt coffee and carpet cleaner, a combination that always reminded me of meetings that promised more than they delivered. Folding chairs were lined in rows, most of them filled. A projector hummed at the front of the room, throwing Kyle's logo onto a pull-down screen that had seen better days. Kyle stood near the podium, jacket pressed tight, just a little too tight. He looked thinner, tired. He smiled when he saw me come in, the kind of smile you practice so it doesn't crack. Tom, he said loud enough for people to hear. Glad you could make it. I nodded and took a seat in the second row, the blue folder resting on my knee. Diane sat off to the side, hands clasped so tight her knuckles were white. Gavin slipped in late, sliding into a chair like he belonged there. He avoided my eyes. Kyle launched into his presentation. Growth projections, partnerships, words like synergy and runway floated through the room, light and hollow. A few investors nodded. Others stared at their phones. When he clicked to the slide about finances, the room shifted. Someone cleared their throat. A woman in the back raised her hand. Can you explain the payroll delay last week, she asked. Kyle laughed softly. Temporary banking issue, already resolved. Another hand went up. Our fleet vendor says contracts are being reevaluated. Kyle's smile tightened. Standard review. I waited. A man I recognized from years back, older gray hair, calm eyes, leaned forward. What's the current ownership structure, he asked. Kyle hesitated, just a beat too long. It's diversified, he said. Aligned. That's when I stood. I didn't rush. I didn't announce myself. Chairs creaked as heads turned. Kyle looked at me, confusion flickering across his face. I can clarify, I said. The room quieted, not because I asked it to, but because something in my voice told it to. I walked to the front and set the blue folder on the table beside the podium. It made a soft thud, heavier than it looked. Kyle opened his mouth to speak. I raised a hand not to silence him, just to pause him. For the record, I said, my name is Tom Halverson. I'm the majority investor. A murmur rippled through the room. 73%, I continued, structured over multiple tranches with voting rights. Kyle swallowed. I opened the folder and slid out the first page. This is the withdrawal notice, filed legally, within contract, effective this week. Diane's breath caught. Gavin shifted in his seat. I didn't look at them. I looked at the investors. This company relied on my capital, I said, my credit backing, and my personal guarantee on the fleet lease, which I chose not to renew. Kyle found his voice. You can't just... I did, I said, not unkindly. I laid out the receipts next. The SUV purchase, the insurance authorization, the golf charges, Green Valley Country Club, date, amount. This vehicle, I said, tapping the page, is mine. Authorization was removed, coverage updated. The older investor nodded slowly. That explains the exposure, he said. Kyle's face flushed. You're doing this to humiliate me. I met his eyes. No, I'm doing this to stop. The room was silent now. Even the projector seemed to hum quieter. Diane stood up. Tom, she said, voice shaking. Please? I turned to her then. I paid for the lifestyle, I said, not the lies. Gavin stood too, smoothing his jacket. This is unnecessary, he said. We can discuss this privately. I looked at him for the first time that night. You're not part of this, I said. He sat back down. The older investor cleared his throat. Kyle, he said, you failed to disclose dependency risk. That's not a banking issue. That's governance. Kyle's shoulders sagged. For the first time, he looked his age. I closed the folder. You didn't lose everything tonight, I said, my voice steady. You just stopped living on mine. No one clapped. No one argued. The truth doesn't need applause. I picked up the folder and walked back to my seat. As I passed Diane, she reached for my arm, then stopped. Gavin was already checking his phone the way people do when they're planning an exit. The meeting dissolved in low voices and shuffling chairs. Kyle stood alone at the front, staring at the screen like it might offer him an answer. I walked out into the cool night air and took a deep breath. The hotel lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere inside, a pot of coffee burned. I felt tired, lighter, sad, all at once. The quiet after a storm is different from ordinary quiet. It doesn't feel empty, it feels settled. That's how the house felt the morning after the meeting. No slamming doors, no buzzing phone. Just sunlight creeping across the kitchen floor and the hum of the refrigerator doing its job. Diane moved out 2 days later. No yelling, no bargaining. She packed what was hers and left the rest like she wasn't sure it had ever belonged to her at all. We handled the divorce the same way everything else ended, clean, documented, and fair. I didn't try to take more than I deserved. I just stopped giving what I didn't know. Kyle's company didn't disappear. It shrank. I heard through Walt that Mercer Route survived after a painful restructuring. Fewer vans, fewer promises, real margins. Kyle stayed on as CEO, but the swagger was gone. He had to explain numbers instead of decorating them. That kind of lesson sticks longer than humiliation. Gavin vanished almost overnight. Diane called once, weeks later, voice small, and said he stopped answering my messages. I didn't respond. Some truths don't need commentary. I sold the house and bought a smaller place outside town, a plain ranch with a 2-car garage and a workbench that fit my tools just right. On weekends, I fished the Fox River with Ray or worked on a cedar table I'd been meaning to build for years. Wood has rules. Respect them, and it holds together. Ignore them, and it splits. Some nights were lonely. I won't lie about that. At 57, solitude can feel like failure if you let it. But over time, it started to feel like space. Room to breathe. Room to hear my own thoughts without them being drowned out by someone else's expectations. I thought a lot about revenge during those weeks, about whether that's what I'd really done. Here's the truth, revenge. The loud kind burns hot and fast. What I did was quieter. I took my keys back. I closed accounts that were draining me. I drew lines where I should have drawn them years earlier. And that changed everything. If you're listening to this and something in it feels familiar, if you've ever paid for peace with your dignity or stayed silent because it seemed easier, remember this: it's never too late to stand up without raising your voice. If this story made you pause or reflect or think of someone who needs to hear it, share it with them. And if you want more stories like this, stories about quiet strength, real consequences, and taking life back one step at a time, stay with us. Sometimes the most powerful move you can make is the calmest one.